Hey everyone, welcome to Gaming Under the Influence. My name's Alex. This is Mike. We're coming to you out of the Green Dragon CVR. Best place to play and purchase the hottest new games, and including hundreds of Ontario craft beer.
Tell you more about the one we're drinking right now at the end of the video, but today we'd like to get right into our topic. I hope you enjoy it. This video is called Shut the Hells Up.
Shut the hell up, Games Media.
Shut the Hell Up, Games Media. Mimicking the title of a recent and really stupid Kotaku article called Shut the Hell Up, Deacon. This is a study in what we'll soon explain is the academicism of gaming journalism. Journalists who, according to Mark Kern, team lead for Vanilla World of Warcraft, creator of EM8, ER3, Firefall, and producer of Diablo 2 and Brood War, the least qualified people on the planet to cover video games.
I agree.
Strong words, but probably close to the actual
Wouldn't say
case
he's off
here.
the mark, yeah.
So, the fact that it departs from arbitrary formal conventions decided by accepted authorities is behind the vast Metacritic disparity between Days Gone and mechanically similar but thematically fashionable and progressive titles, such as Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And we say decided by accepted authorities, quote unquote, for the reason that many individuals working both in the gaming industry and media seem to think that beauty is kind of a technocratic proclivity, like the domain of experts to limit and decide upon, as though because of your employment or how long you've been familiar with the industry, you're somehow better suited than another human being to decide what's good or to assess what's beautiful.
Like this higher power that's capable of speaking for consumers, right?
An academy of sorts,
The rest of us plebes, yeah.
An academy who erects like arbitrary rules to determine quality based on their own preferences. Preferences we'll detail shortly. But
awful.
To support this view, as though beauty were a technocratic proclivity, it's exhibited first, our first quote by ex-ArenaNet writer Jessica Price, who I'm sure anybody watching this will remember if there's anybody at all, who objected to community input, in relation to her writing on the basis that she was being told how to do her job, as though that's a particularly terrible thing for any of us.
Yeah, right.
I know I'm shit at mine. I could probably use some advice. A journalist, Chris Scullion, supposing that 13 years of experience somehow qualify him as a specialist in beauty. Eurogamer admitting they will not merely stick to covering games and instead cover politics. Another fired editor, David Milner, thinking that the fact that he has been awarded, he's given trophies for gaming journalism and he's proud of that. I mean, there's many unkind comparisons I could draw,
Yeah.
To pride in, an award for being the worst kind of person, but I guess we'll leave that to everybody else's imagination. Yeah. There's also articles talking about a quote-unquote onslaught of attacks on gaming journalism, but we believe these are due to one factor alone, that most gaming journalists are horrid propagandists and lovers of ugliness.
Pretty much.
That they observe a different criterion of quality than normal people, within their little academy, is evinced by the disparities between critical and player metascores for the two games under discussion here, 83 critic score for ACO and 59 user score, while Days Gone holds a 72 critic score and I think over an 80 user score. That 80 at the time of writing, but that was
which
a
is
week or so
surprising
ago.
for Metacritic.
Indeed, yeah.
That's insane.
And we say that these conventions that cause journalists to score a game like Days Gone low are formal conventions versus material or mechanical ones, because Days Gone plays very similarly to very popular, very critically acclaimed titles such as Red Dead Redemption and The Last of Us. In some cases, after spending a good 40 hours with it now, I'd say I prefer the combat, by many leagues to that in Red Dead Redemption.
Yeah.
Certainly to that in even critically acclaimed games such as God of War, which we're not going to harp on again, but...
No.
Yeah.
I think we had enough of that.
And the reason we call Assassin's Creed Odyssey an example of a fashionable and progressive title is because, this is so true of this game that, to the point of the game's director apologizing for, quote, missing the mark by writing a plot point whereby the player character, who's literally the ancestor of later series protagonists, weds a member of the opposite sex. This was a source of outrage. I'm sure many people will remember. We don't need to get too much deeper into that. Yeah, but this was later altered to, quote, give players the option to engage in a strictly platonic relationship with the previously mentioned parent of future protagonists.
That's called a plot hole.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what you could possibly call that. Again, many unkind things I could say, but we'll spare the few people listening. The game is without a doubt a hollow soulless skeleton for fashionable ideologies to inhabit and disseminate by. The same few buildings are liberally reused, with a single temple model appearing 20 or 30 times over the course of the game. Meaningless fetch quests and artificial frustration events abound, with the skills-based combat thoroughly diminished by level gating and unbalanced, grindy, skewered numbers-based damage systems, which, are pretty obviously intended to induce microtransaction purchases. Nor am I the only one who thinks so. Even Jason Schreier, who we probably remember shilling for ACO microtransactions in the past, admitted later that the question of whether the existence of microtransactions by nature makes a game worse, even when they're easy to ignore, is one I find really interesting. And the answer is probably yes.
Yeah.
But hey, at least in the game, the male protagonist can marry a dude, right?
There's
definitely deserving of that
finally,
A+ on Metacritic.
Finally
for that.
a plus, yeah.
So I guess this leads us to say that contemporary games journalism is thoroughly enamored with theses, which, when they afflict a work of art, are tantamount to kind of like misconceptions of the creative form in the mind of the artist, or alien importations and impurities in the creative process, such as when a man goes so far as to alter the work itself as to the rules and determined ways the concept requires it to be, by the forcible application, kind of to control that form, of alien elements, a desire to edify or disedify, moral intentions, politics, profit-mongering, And the journalist appears to seek not the beauty of the given artistic form,
Nope.
but the grin of personality upon a work, the grin of their own personality in most cases, upon a work constructed according to like senile academic rules, that are dreamed up in these like dark workshops of supposed experts, right?
Right.
And properly, I think, criticism, this is a quote from somebody else, though it can always derive its inspiration from philosophic principles or from whatever ideology you unfortunately happen to entertain, criticism remains on the same plane as the work and the particular, without being itself operative or making any creative judgments, rather judging from without and after the event. The important idea here, though, being that it remains on the same plane as the work and the particular. There's no science of assessing the quality of a work of art. There can be no science of particular things like morality in art generally. And in this case, it's important to understand that you can't just apply an abstract principle to works of art and somehow come out with a ready-made description of whether or not they're good. Like, it doesn't make sense to sit there and be like, does it hit these tick boxes in my political repertoire? And if so, it's a quality game. Like, that's absurd. It doesn't matter what your ideology is, even if it's one that I personally agreed with, which in this case I definitely don't. But even so, that would make it a piece of propaganda.
Isn't that
right?
a form of bias in itself?
Yes, certainly. I think it is. Conformity of a game to ideology or personal preference isn't really relevant to whether or not it's good. What the critic ought to judge is the beauty of the work, the degree to which the artist successfully translates his conception to matter via kind of its built-in, undeviating rules of operation through which the work will well and truly be what it ought to be. Like, the idea born in the mind of its artist, being an individual thing with a certain type to it, being a certain kind of thing, has, in the same way that fire is hot, like certain ways to unfold its properties, that are consistent with what it is and don't violate the core of it, its seed of its identity in the mind of the artist. And I guess what we're trying to say is the standard of quality ought to be, on the one hand, how well the artist translates his conception to matter, and on the formal side, like we talked about in our games or art video, the primary reality informing that idea, which we can leave aside for now. But this notion that the quality of a game depends on how well the artist successfully creates his concept in some matter
and
is also
transforms it into the
how well does he take the paint and make a painting with it, right? This standard is promoted also by Inside Gaming. We're approvingly mentioning this right now. Approvingly. I know sometimes it's hard to tell who we're shitting on and who we're complimenting. But
right.
We like this one, A similar standard is promoted by these guys who took issue with the lukewarm critical reception of Rage 2 due to what they perceived as purely subjective reasons. And this is a quote: "I feel like some gaming journos are trying to judge this game on criteria it did not ask to be judged by, certainly. Whether or not it has dying mothers who deliver soliloquies to their sons with acoustic guitars. It's not setting out to tell you some didactic thing about how you ought to live your life. It did what it set out to do, though, and so it's a good product, right?
They even said it themselves. It's called Rage. Like, what can you expect
I don't know what you're
from
looking
that?
for. One of the main components of whether or not something is good is how well it successfully translates the concept in the mind of the artist into his chosen matter, and if it did what the guy was trying to do, right? There's no, quote, dying mother who delivers a dying soliloquy with an acoustic guitar. This isn't The Last of Us. Like, fair enough. And honestly, the fact that you want it to be that way, I really don't. Other than to be a social engineer, I don't understand what your motivation
Why would you
could
want
be, right?
more of the same from other games?
Sure.
This is something else entirely.
Sure. So, guess to summarize, fine art requires that the appetite or the creative habit of the artist tend directly to the proper end of the work, which ought to be beauty, the good of the thing conceived in his mind.
Yeah.
When an ulterior motive animates the artist's activity or becomes the goal by which his talent and tools and matter are regulated, the fine arts, quote, revert to the generic type of art and its inferior species, the mechanical arts. You end up making a tool for serving a goal, but not something good in itself. So whatever else it is, it doesn't qualify, as a piece of art, something that's good in whether or not it achieves some exterior goal.
Yeah.
And it appears to be as mechanisms of propaganda or identity-based gratification that journalists evaluate titles like Days Gone or Rage 2, only to find them lacking. Criticisms issuing, for example, from common journalistic dislike of white male protagonists, apocalyptic settings, and a lack of moralizing certainly pertain to not so much how well the artist translates form to matter, but instead to the formal component. But they assess it only relativistically, insofar as it does or does not exhibit the theses or propaganda points desired by journalists. And we'll provide you with some examples of why we say that a lack of a very specific kind of moralizing drives these journalists to say Days Gone is bad. This quote is from the Kotaku review. It's exhausting to watch another gruff, white dude experience the extremes of humanity brought about by disaster, to be torn between pure, reliable self-interest and the fragile strength of community, as if those are the only two ways to be. It's like dumping water into the ocean, failing to offer anything new in favor of blending formlessly into arguments made by 10 years of The Walking Dead, as though offering something new and making arguments ought to be the point of something anyways. Thank you, Kotaku, for that
Yeah, that was wonderful.
pearl of wisdom.
Thanks for coming out again.
Now we have a Screen Rant article here. Quote, but after all the bad that Deacon has done and the setting of an apocalypse to explore it, it's disappointing that Days Gone doesn't ask a more important question than will Deacon get the life he wants? Deacon let people die just to find his wife again. I'm sure this guy's trying to say he wouldn't. He killed and he cared about no one but himself and his best friend. So when Deacon gets the life he wants, why doesn't Days Gone ask if Deacon even deserves it? Because who gives a fuck? Are you joking? And according to what standard, buddy? Unbelievable. Like, you literally want like some kind of fable built into your games. Like, oh, this is how I should live. I guess I ought not love my family and friends more than other people. Like, I don't even know where to start. There's Kelly Plague's review. I know I'm mispronouncing your name, but that's intentional.
Kelly
Over
Plague.
on YouTube, which we're not going to talk about in depth because it's been covered by so many different people. But we did respond via our YouTube account, and we said we don't believe it's a very good review. The game does have a great story. You could level criticisms regarding the supposed lack of character development, which, by the way, there is many. There's a lot of instances of that in the game that she doesn't seem to have recognized, and apparent lack of depth against any novel like written by Hemingway, for example. And I definitely bet this chick doesn't like him either. A lack of touchy-feely diatribe on toxic masculinity does not a bad story make. The character does not need to learn something which affirms your worldview in fiction. He can just be something.
Yeah.
The reviewer said she was uncomfortable at killing newts and by the gruff male protagonist, undeterred at killing mutants later by realizing they were once people. Like, what were you expecting here? Like, what would the reviewer propose instead? Like Herschel in The Walking Dead, the option to lock them in a barn or something like that? And just to refute the idea that there's no character development and that there's no depth to the characters and that his moral code is just tacked onto the dialogue as a talking point. We call attention to a conversation that occurs mid-game during Deacon's second rendezvous with that O'Brien guy who initially saved his wife in the Freaker outbreak. And after witnessing Neuro-operatives kind of like dissecting a live Freaker, Deacon's like, dude, that's disgusting. He expresses his disgust. And his concern is questioned. O'Brien's like, dude, you kill freaks for a living. Why do you care if we're torturing one? Considering he, was a professional killer of freakers, right? And Deacon responds that he does accomplish his ugly job, but he doesn't revel in it. He doesn't take pleasure in it. And it kind of disgusts him seeing these people like enjoy the suffering of even a freaker, right? It kind of reminds me of a knight, adhering to a chivalric code. Like, he does hard stuff in the world and killing mutants humanely and saving lost children from the shit due to the same motivation, ultimately, like his adherence to like a firm standard of what is right and wrong in the world. I imagine that that's what people here find distasteful, the fact that he has a moral code of any kind anyways, because,
Yeah, maybe.
Details like this remind me again of Hemingway. All we need to understand the story and the inner life of characters, all that stuff is there without it being like heaped on top of us explicitly in exposition. We can learn everything we need to know about ancillary characters and Deacon's moral code through behaviors and actions. And just like with Secure in Souls, I probably prefer it this way,
Yeah, of course.
A lack of exposition dumping. And this example aside, in a broader context, we're not merely inferring that these are the principles that inform games journalism. We spent most of the week preparing this article because there
2 weeks
were reoccurring like instances of people just
they keep coming,
providing
man.
us with easy fodder for the point that we're trying to make right now. So it's not a mere inference that journalists assess the quality
This
of
isn't
games.
a one-off or like
No.
No.
Relative to the presence or absence of theses or ideology therein or self-affirmation. Some go so far as to announce in headlines that they enjoy or dislike games as ideological vessels. This is an article called "The Division 2's Refusal to Engage with Politics Makes It Hard to Enjoy." Not only is the claim that it's not political absurd, quote, but by pretending that the game is not political, the developers try to capitalize on the atmosphere of the current landscape, but without any of the baggage. By refusing to engage with any of the issues it so clearly references, the Division 2 stance or lack thereof seems to fetishize civil unrest and societal upheaval. Okay, buddy, wow.
What the fuck?
Spare us your Marxian interpretations. Frankly, not interested at all. And here's another one from VG24, which we were just harping on yesterday on Twitter.
Yeah.
Quote, "It seems like there's a contemporary unease bubbling beneath the surface of Beyond Good and Evil 2. This is the game he was talking about, of course. One which will reveal itself upon playing. The question is whether Ubisoft, as a mouthpiece, for what? I don't know. Can get away with denying the messages baked into its work one more time, or whether this will be its breakpoint." And we just like to note, as we did in response to this, that they've been knocking out of the park with all of their supposedly apolitical games this entire generation.
Exactly,
Far Cry 5
right?
being the best
Yeah.
example. Division 2 being another fairly successful one. So I don't know what the hell this guy's talking about. The real question is whether your magazine's going to be open in 6 months, buddy. Frankly, I hope not. Similar politicizing articles have recently surfaced pertaining to the upcoming Ghost Recon Breakpoint, the most recent example, from The Verge, from GameSpot, VG24, from Prima Games. And I guess we would respond to all of these, to head off this argument that certainly Ghost Recon is political. Look, it's about the White House or whatever.
Oh, God.
We would respond as we have in the past that the journalists confuse the subject matter and the form of the given work. Representing something is not the same as endorsing it, and it doesn't pose any necessary didactic implications, the fact that something merely exists in your work of art. A game can be about politics, let's say. It can depict political situations
themes of
or
politics.
events or characters without being a propagandistic work within which the creator intended to enshrine a lesson. Star Wars does not promote the Jedi religion. The Sopranos does not promote joining the mafia. Depiction does not equal fetishizing. A similar view, to what I just articulated, appeared actually recently in Forbes from that Eric Kane guy who wrote that Sekiro should not have an easy mode against his colleague Dig Theorem a month or so ago. And he says, quote, "Like every other medium, games which cover political issues should do so in a way that touches on universal truths, long-standing controversies, and this is more effective than trying to wedge in the hot-button political ideas of the here and now. Likewise, political entertainment should be about making us think and scrutinize ideas. It should not be about convincing us to vote a certain way. And politics in art should be about making people think more deeply instead. It should be about raising questions, not more answers. It should be about making people question their own beliefs and see the world through a new lens, even if we reject that lens," which, definitely don't agree with his articulation, but the underlying point is sound, right? You can represent things without endorsing them. The point can be ulterior to that, There's also the following blather from The Guardian, which is a terrible publication. I definitely, unless you want to laugh, make sure you turn your ad blocker on, then go read it, because you don't want to give them any of your revenue. It's all set up for you, buddy? This is from The Guardian, actually, right here. Following blather from The Guardian, quote, "Video games can and should be put to work for left-wing politics at this moment of cultural and political uncertainty. Many games communicate progressive values in their narrative and content, but if they are to go further, we must reimagine what a game could look like." The guy went on to say also in the article that killing Nazis in Wolfenstein is somehow like a expression of Western colonial ideas, as though conquest is somehow a Western invention, but let's leave that aside too. And who can forget this absurd episode of Verbal Diarrhea from a quote-unquote journalist strangely obsessed with Tucker Carlson.
So
this one was good. This magazine is shut
so
down, by the
good.
way, which is awesome. So this is a quote too. "The reasoning lies in the inherent power fantasy." Tucker Carlson empowers those sitting on their couch with Bud Light yelling at brown people? Tom Clancy lured tech-minded absolutists who see military strength above all. That's not even a complete sentence. The Division 2 takes from both columns, reveling in the chance to extract better performance from weapons and make each shot a kill. Whoa.
Wow,
In this context, it's all quite brutal. Sociopathic? Probably. Blood isn't excessive, but the sheer quantity and intended thrills of it all, for the sake of democracy, turns this into a Wild West simulator. Division 2 just replaces Native Americans with boilerplate gangs. Thankfully, again, Variety is shutting down its gaming section
That's
soon,
awful.
following
That's
a growing
fucking
trend amongst left-leaning publications like Gixel and Vice's gaming wing too, thank God. And Kotaku also may soon lose some staff after being acquired by a new company.
Does anyone actually like Kotaku?
Definitely not. Definitely
who
not.
the fuck? What the hell?
Yeah, thankfully Variety is shutting down its gaming section. Following a growing trend amongst left-leaning publications, Kotaku may also soon lose some staff, referring you here to articles from oneangrygamer.net. And I guess their mutual audience, is likely individuals who publicly communicate such sentiments as the following, and to whom it appears self-evident that games are mere instruments of emotional gratification and identity affirmation in fiction. And this was actually liked by the Elder Scrolls Online official Twitter account. I get really emotional, quote, playing the Elder Scrolls Online because their quests and stories have just easy representation. Trans quest lines exploring being yourself, they got me. Sassy wives, they got me. Openly gender fluid deity who's a main NPC of a whole zone, they got me. Anyways, ESO is huge and reminded me how low my standards have been. It's not hard. It's not hard to write representation. It's not hard to make real people and tackle real issues. It's not hard, etc., etc.
Why do we need real people in fiction? Isn't that what fiction is?
Just to say, this is probably who these people are targeting, but I suppose they vastly overestimated the size of the demographic. Yeah. I guess, just to reiterate what we have said in the past in response to all of this kind of stuff, the depiction of any subject in a work of fine art can only, lest, subversion and this grin of personality be the goal of the work. The artist ought to only work for the good of the work to be done, to make matter resplendent with beauty and seek to the complete subjection of all material components like gameplay and art, and whether or not it's fun and whether or not it's making money, to the formal object of art, of all means to the conception in the mind of the artist, who concertably employs like certain sensible symbols appropriate to his medium to induce
real important stuff.
Yeah, to induce the presence in the mind of the player, something over and above those symbols themselves, the mere pressing of buttons, The over and above in the case of fine arts, like anything else, the final cause of their conception is not a tool or a means of politicizing or making money. It's just to be beautiful. It's not ordered to the service of man, not to be used as a means, but enjoyed as an end. And moralizing, politicizing, commercializing, or seeking accessibility, these are all failures of the last end of art, I guess you would say.
That's all bad stuff.
These are deformations,
Mm-hmm.
The observance of political theses qualifies the work as an ideological instrument, as propaganda, and which even Forbes admits, in this quote, also from Eric Kane, politics and art should not be about convincing other people to take a political position or vote a certain way or despise someone. That's propaganda.
Literally propaganda.
The very lowest art form there is, and even more debased than advertising. At best, it's satire, though that's another story altogether, And we'd also like to note, briefly, that this journalistic deference to theses or subjective standards and opinions, instead of reliance on detailed event or context-based reporting, is very widespread and certainly not specific to games media. This phenomena has been termed truth decay, quote, the declining role of facts and analysis in civil discourse and its effect on American life. Researchers for a recent RAND report analyzed, quote, millions of lines of text in print, broadcast, and online journalism from 1989, the first year such data was available, to 2017, to identify usage in patterns and words and phrases. And they were able to measure these differences not only within one outlet or type of media, but also comparatively with other forms of journalism. What they discovered was a, quote, gradual and subtle shift over time and between old and new media towards a more subjective form of journalism that is grounded in personal perspective. Consider broadcast news. Before 2000, broadcast news segments were more likely to include relatively complex academic and precise language, as well as complex reasoning. After 2000, broadcast news has become less pre-planned as on-air personalities and guests engage in conversations about news. It's definitely not specific to gaming journalism in any case. So we're going to leave you with our conclusion here. The problem, to reiterate, is that games journalists are an academy of self-appointed experts whose self-imposed criterion of quality is the presence or absence of political theses or propaganda or self-affirmation in video games. This is unsurprising considering their oversight by politically minded and funded leadership and companies, a fact which to my mind renders dismal any prospects of improvement. Smaller organizations or even individuals have exhibited a greater aptitude lately for functions previously performed by journalists.
So what's the solution?
The solution is to dissolve
the institution
of games journalism, which is already happening, as we said before. In ages past, the ability to disseminate information at a lesser scale may have necessitated the existence of these large-scale publications, but now, when they compete online directly with smaller, more capable entities, quantifiably more capable, we won't have to refer you to many examples to verify that fact, but like the IGN plagiarists and who didn't even finish Resident Evil 2, the guy who can't jump over the tutorial level in Cuphead.
Yeah.
Give me a break. Not to mention the coverage. Go watch a review from Carrick at ACG. He makes badass reviews that are not 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap.
Yeah.
They're actually very good. lesser organizations have exhibited a greater aptitude for the functions journalists performed. And as we said, in the ages past, there was not such a great ability for normal people to disseminate information. But now, when those people directly compete with online magazines, the institution of
Stand a
gaming
chance.
journalism may not only be useless, but unjust.
Yeah.
According to this principle proper to the political sphere called subsidiarity, just as it is gravely wrong, quote, to take from individuals what they can accomplish by their own initiative and industry and give it to the community, so also is it an injustice, and at the same time a grave evil and disturbance of right order, to assign to a greater and higher association what lesser and subordinate organizations can do.
It's the worst fucking thing ever.
Every social activity ought of its very nature to furnish help to the members of the social body and never to absorb them. Thereby, greater organizations will more freely, powerfully, and effectively do all those things that belong to them alone because they alone can do them, which is not the case anymore with gaming journalism.
Apparently
they probably
not, which
can't
is a
do
good
it at
thing,
all.
yeah.
Although, of course, there are standout instances. Not to say that you can't be a good journalist in the gaming industry now, though you probably aren't, well represented
You probably won't be, yeah.
in magazines like Kotaku and stuff like that.
Yeah,
not to say you won't
absolutely
be,
not.
but that the institution you work for is kind of contrary to the integrity of your work.
They wouldn't
Yeah.
let you be anyway
That's-
because you have to abide by their code or what they
That's
believe
right.
in, right?
That's
You have to
right.
push their agenda. At the end of the day, whoever's signing your checks, you're going to align with them because, let's be honest,
That's right.
they're paying you.
So that's our take
Right?
with the problems with gaming journalism nowadays.
The many problems.
We're not the only people to put out videos of this like this.
Absolutely not.
Like this lately.
We're just the one with the least amount of views.
we're just the
and
ones that
subscribers.
nobody watches.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Which we'll
Perhaps
take.
also
Fine.
the drunkest.
Gotta
Gotta catch
I'm gonna
up
have
there.
to agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. Just do it. All right, we're caught up.
Yes.
That's party time, I guess. Then.
So, to tell you briefly about the beer we've just enjoyed.
Right on.
It's called Necessary Juice Sour Double IPA from Half Hours on Earth. One of our favorite breweries. Talked about them before. I guess it's kind of like a milkshake IPA. It's got lactose, sugar, apricots, peaches, Madagascar, vanilla. It kind of tastes
Milk,
like
sugar,
that,
hopped with-
like that Blood Brothers Nitro Sour Abracadabra we tried a couple weeks back. It's really smooth, probably due to the presence of lactose, and you definitely taste the fruit. Bit of sourness. I think it's delicious.
What are these two words here? Azaka?
Azaka and Denali.
And
I don't
Denali?
know.
You
Are
don't
they
know?
herbs? Are they flowers? It's a mystery. Let
We
us
gotta
know.
check. We'll check the
Yeah.
Google machine on our break.
This has been fun.
Thanks for stopping by. If you made it to this far, which you probably didn't, then thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And
If you're ever in the
we'll,
area, stop by and we'll buy you a drink.
Damn right.
Yeah. Have a good evening.